As I've mentioned on my channel before, I am very bad at watching anime. I love it, obviously, but when it comes to the actual consumption of it, I tend to have a hard time sitting down and actually committing to watching. As a result, there's a number of anime I've missed that, in one regard or another, are considered a classic. So I'm going to make an effort and start watching some of these classics and seeing if they've held up to the test of time for a new viewer in the modern age. Are they shows that every new anime fan should go back and experience? Or are they better off lost to time? This time around, we're going to be watching anime's favorite, Master of Disguise. Nope, that show literally just came out. We're going a bit older than that, and watching anime's favorite group of bumbling thieves who are Masters of Disguise. We're watching Lupin III.
Lupin III. Lupin III. Lupin.
In addition to several movies, Lupin III has actually had a multitude of seasons that have spanned all the way from its anime origin in 1971 to as recently as just last year in October of 2021, where it celebrated its 50th anniversary. And depending on who you ask, everyone has a different answer as to where you should start the show. Ultimately, I decided that for the sake of seeing if a show holds up, I don't want to just arbitrarily pick some point in the middle of its history and see if eventually it got good. And I'm also sure as hell not watching the entire series right now. The point of this is to see how well old, classic anime that were highly regarded during their time hold up to modern viewers. So I decided I would be watching through the classic Lupin III Part 1. Lupin is an action comedy following the exploits of the titular thief, Lupin III, descendant of the great thief Lupin Arsène. He and his crew, consisting of the skilled gunslinger Daisuke Jigen, love interest Fujiko Mine, and master swordsman Goemon Ishikawa, operate on what are sometimes very mixed loyalties as they carry out heist after caper after boneheaded stunt. The very first thing to note when going into this series is that, unlike seemingly nearly all anime nowadays, Lupin is told very episodically. While the general relationship between characters is maintained, ultimately the events of the previous episode have very little to absolutely no bearing on the next, with little, if any, reference to past episodes. Now, there's nothing wrong with this at all, and it works for a show that is, all in all in its first season, a pretty lighthearted comedy. It was just a little jarring with the first episode specifically, because here we're getting ready for a show about thieves, and then, oh wait, okay, I guess we're actually doing a Formula 1 race. Alright, there's our main character, I guess he's a great racer. Oh, and the Scorpion Gang is trying to have him killed, so they must be the antagonists of this show. Wait, the top police inspector is also a racer? How did that even happen? Oh, okay, Fujiko's a spy gathering intel. That one makes sense. Ah, right, 1971. These are our first exposures to the main cast, and their first times being shown to us are them outside their norm, which is fine, except we haven't had a chance to learn what their norms are. In fact, it's not until multiple episodes later that the show actually starts introducing characters during the show's intro, after we've already had enough exposure to them to figure out all of their deals. Now, I want to clarify that I'm not using this as a reason to not recommend the show. It was just something that was really jarring and honestly gave me a bad first impression, so I thought it was worth bringing up. Especially because the show does get much, much better. Most episodes tend to play out in similar fashions, and hit a fun fusion between channeling the spirits of classic James Bond films and Looney Tunes. You have exciting chases, infiltrations, and heists that are all being carried out by a crew that's one part super thief and one part bumbling idiot. The real strength of the show comes from the individual characters' personalities and quirkiness and how beautifully they all play off one another. We have Lupin, the head of the crew. He's incredibly intelligent and resourceful, if also a tad full of himself at times and blinded by his own skill and luck. He'll just about always lose sight of everything for the sake of a pretty face, which is how Fujiko tends to get the upper hand, and he has a charmingly inflated ego that, while justified, is also how he ultimately gets into the most trouble. Jigen is the cool and collected crackshot who often has to act, or at least try to act, as the voice of reason for Lupin's insane schemes. But regardless of how harebrained the plan is, he is most of all loyal and always pulls through for Lupin when he needs it. Goemon is the stoic master swordsman. While he does ultimately join Lupin after starting out as an enemy, he is the most inconsistent member of the crew, as he's usually less willing to put up with Lupin's nonsense. Inspector Zenigata, my own personal favorite character, is Lupin's nemesis, the one whose life goal it is to get him behind bars. He's simultaneously an incredibly competent member of the law and an absolute bumbling incompetent buffoon. And finally, there's the character that I really want to talk about. Fujiko Mine is perhaps the most interesting character out of the bunch. I will admit that at the start of the show, I was a little nervous about her. Her very first appearance seemed to just be for sex appeal, and then for several episodes, she just kind of served as the damsel for Lupin to rescue. Which, like, okay, if I was looking for a well-written female character, I probably wasn't gonna go to an early 70s anime for an example. Except as time went on, her character actually got far more interesting. Fujiko serves as a classic femme fatale who ultimately is in everything for her own gain. Whether she allies herself with Lupin just to get herself closer to her goal, to then abandon him after, or is orchestrating an elaborate hostage situation to get him to, quote, rescue her, and thus give up his winnings, often sending them straight into her own lap in the end. Her true nature and allegiances are very often a mystery and make her a very entertaining character to watch. Because as Jigen always tries to stress, even when it seems like she'd have no reason to betray, she can't be trusted. She's always planning something. She serves a dual purpose as Lupin's main love interest and honestly his greatest rival in crime. She's conniving, mysterious, and uses the stereotypical roles that a female character would normally serve in older media to gain the advantage over her male counterparts. One of the strengths of the show's episodic nature is the fact that it allows this fun and quirky crew to just slot themselves into whatever wacky job seems like fun this week. This week they're trying to steal a deck of playing cards. Now they're on a cruise ship wedding party to steal a jewel. Now they're facing off against a time traveler. And in my favorite episode, now Lupin is finally behind bars and he has to not escape. I want to talk about that last one because it illustrates what I said earlier, the real strength of the show coming from the characters' relationships and how they play off each other. The fourth episode, One Chance to Break Out, starts with Zenigata finally successfully capturing Lupin and getting him thrown in jail. No gimmicks or master plans going into it on Lupin's end, he actually got. And what ensues is an episode where really not much physically happens. Lupin has a year before he gets executed, and he spends that time not trying to escape. And what we see is Zenigata going progressively more insane, getting more bored, more frustrated, trying to figure out why Lupin isn't trying anything. We see a normally very vibrant and passionate character in Zenigata crumble when he finally achieves his life goal and is left with nothing else. It plays on this idea that Zenigata and Lupin need each other. Lupin needs a motivating force behind his capers, and Zenigata needs something to be constantly striving to achieve. It reminds me of the unwritten rules featured in a fantastic web serial Worm, where both criminals and heroes recognize that in the end, their feuds ultimately boil down to a big game of cat and mouse, and they need to respect the roles each other serve and the purpose they give each other. And we see just how important Lupin is to Zenigata when, I guess spoiler, he does finally escape. You can see the smile briefly return to Zenigata as the chase ensues, his life having meaning again. And we also see just how prideful Lupin is in his motivations for why he needed to escape the way he did in order to fix his image in both Zenigata's and his own eyes. I really love that so much of their relationship was explored in one episode via so little actually happening, and it speaks volumes to the quality of the characters and the writing. I feel like most downfalls of the show are things that are truly just a result of it being made when it was. Audio syncing, I noticed, seemed rather off at points, and there are the occasional minor animation errors. Various sound effects were very dated and overused, and characters were a bit more stiff and jumpy with their movements, or just didn't move at all. But if any problem were to be especially problematic, I would say it's the audio syncing. Because not only was it a problem, but it was an inconsistent problem. And after looking around online, I can see it's not just a streaming issue with Crunchyroll, but it seems to be an issue with the episodes themselves. Some episodes are fine, but in others, you will see characters' lips flap for a full second before any talking actually transpires. Gunshots are heard before a gun is even on the screen. And I foresee this as being more of an issue for some folks than others. It took me a couple episodes to just kinda get used to and accept the fact that the audio was going to be off. And once I did, it honestly stopped bothering me. But it does prove to be incredibly distracting at points, and it could most certainly pull folks out of the experience. Outside of the technical aspects, I would say the other large downfall of the show is its handling of women characters, or lack thereof. Fujiko is, in the majority of situations, the only woman present throughout the entire episode, and during that time is likely being sexualized, fawned over, or straight up assaulted. On the rare occasions that another woman is present, they're just a one-time and largely one-note character who's just there for the sake of the plot, and they don't really offer much. Now, did I expect much different from a 70s anime? No, not really, but still. Aside from these hiccups, Lupin III Part 1 proved to be an unexpectedly charming step back into the earlier days of anime. While the episodic nature of it held it back from exploring deeper plot lines, that's not the kind of show it wanted to be. It's a fun little romp featuring some quirky characters and silly action. While the show can take on some more serious or somber tones, it is at its heart a light-hearted and goofy show about the world's greatest thief and his crew's capers. With that being said, when I first started it, I was a little nervous about what my verdict on it was going to be. It was a fine show, sure, but was it doing anything novel? Is there a specific reason that a modern viewer should go back and seek out this show? Well, call me Fujiko because maybe I'm doing a last quarter heel turn. I think Lupin is actually going to be very helpful for me going forward in figuring out exactly how I want to determine the verdict on shows for this video series. Throughout the entirety of watching the show and writing this script, I haven't been sure what my verdict was going to be. Because, as fun a show as it was, I don't think it's a show I would ever say, "Oh, you're looking for a show to watch? Bruh, check out Lupin III Part 1. It was fun and enjoyable, sure, but is there a specific reason to go back to it after all these years? Aside from the longevity the series has enjoyed, I don't really think so. The characters are fun and the hijinks are entertaining, but ultimately the only thing Lupin brings that you wouldn't get out of a currently airing anime is just the charm that comes with watching an older show, which often also includes the drawbacks inherently present in the quality of older shows. Cowboy Bebop was easy to say yes, you should absolutely go back and watch this because of how powerful its narrative and driving themes were. Elfen Lied was easy to say no because it was a hot mess of jumbled ideas and genres that couldn't play nice together. So, does Lupin III Part 1 hold up? Good lord, as a quick aside here, I've been staring at my screen for the better part of an hour writing and rewriting just my verdict because of how hard this is. Yes. Ultimately, the question I'm asking is, does this show hold up? When coming at it as a modern viewer in the modern age, is this show still enjoyable? Is it still offering something of value? While what can only be described as a horrendous failure of the Bechdel test is definitely relevant, I personally felt like Fujiko as a character was interesting enough to at least let it slide a little. And aside from the audio syncing issues, most of the other ways Lupin shows its age from a technical standpoint were, frankly, charming. When I approached Lupin from the standpoint of, does the show do anything to make itself stand out from modern shows, I feel like I was more inclined to say no. Because in the end, it's not doing anything that, at least now, is really anything new. But I don't think it's fair to even try approaching it from that direction. And while it's not a show I would say is crucial for folks to check out, it is by no means one that should be actively passed up either. It's the beginning of one of the oldest running anime out there, and I think the foundation that series was built on, while it may show some cracks from normal wear and tear over time, still stands as strong today as it did back then. As always, a huge shout out to Artemis Robbins and all my other Patreon supporters. Does this sound like a fair way to approach the does it hold up question? Please weigh in and give me your thoughts below. Also, check out my Patreon and consider donating to help me make more and better videos. You can also follow me on Twitter, or now Hive as well, though I'm still trying to figure out how that one works. Until next time, I'm CJ Pecor, the Angry Avocado, and I still don't have a sign off.